What's blocking my LEGO minifigs? I've decided to stop playing X-Defiant for a few hours and actually make another YouTube video. In that time, I have escaped the zombie-infested casinos of Fortune City to somewhere even worse, California. At this point, I don't really care that there's zombies around. Let's be honest, it's California. Can you even tell the difference? But hey, look at how high res I am now. It's cause I'm on new hardware. Pretty epic, right? And speaking of new hardware, what's the best way to show off how powerful your console truly is? A game with hundreds of NPCs trying to steal your skin. Dead Rising. The third one, specifically. Flashback to 2010. The big man himself, Keiji Inafune, was talking about the prospect of another Dead Rising game. He mentioned that, quote, they won't start speaking about a new game until they see the sales of Dead Rising 2, unquote. However, he did say that he liked working with Blue Castle, and he'd be willing to work with them again. Then, Dead Rising 2 off the record happened. Since Dead Rising 2 was such a banger in Capcom's eyes, they did in fact start speaking about Dead Rising 3. They mentioned that the game was going to continue the story of the previous game, and include more DLC like Case Zero and Case West from Dead Rising 2. Then, E3 2013 came along, and they revealed Dead Rising 3 to the masses. Blue Castle was back, but this time they were named Capcom Vancouver. They started by telling everyone that it was being developed on PC, so that they could pursue their vision for the series. Then this little console called the Xbox One came out, and all of a sudden Dead Rising 3 became an Xbox One exclusive launch title. Everyone was excited except for Germany, because the game couldn't make it past the ratings board, and they decided to not let the game release. And so the game launched, pulling at Dead Rising 2 by completely replacing the main character, and improving upon the game's mechanics by including more combination weapons and tightening up everything, as well as adding skin pores to all the characters. Greasy. After the game launched on Xbox in 2013, it came out on PCs a year later in 2014. Dead Rising 3's gameplay included many prominent new additions and even more updated takes on old mechanics. As the game's scope expanded, so did the map. And so the game takes place in the fictional city of Los Perdidos, California. Gone are the days of shopping malls and casinos, as we're now treated to the bustling streets of this expansive city. The city is heavily inspired by Los Angeles, and its 4 districts each have their own distinct look and feel. The first of these is Central City, the bustling downtown area. This district is filled with tall skyscrapers, luxurious hotels, and expensive shops. South Almira is the game's industrial area, populated by factories, warehouses, the dockyard, and a construction site for a building that'll never get finished now. Next up is Sunset Hills, the more luxurious living area of the map, characterized by the many multi-million-dollar mansions found around the place. And lastly, Ingleton is the more rundown, poor neighborhood of the city, where you can find comparatively small houses and tightly lived-in apartment complexes. Each of these areas also has a variety of buildings to enter and interiors to explore. Not every building and room is accessible, but there's enough of them to make the world feel like a real lived-in place. Dead Rising 3 puts you in the shoes of yet another new character, this time being Nick Ramos, a mechanic that works at Ranchorama, a chain of garages around the city. With Nick being a mechanic, combo weapons of course make their return from the previous installments, but also, due to Nick being a mechanic, he is not restricted by not having a workbench around him, and thus he can craft a combo weapon anywhere he damn well pleases, which is a major win in my book. As I said in my Dead Rising 2 video, I loathed having to run back to the same few areas over and over, and being restricted to use what was in close proximity to them, but this completely nullifies that issue. Nick being a mechanic also widens the scale of just how insane some of these combo weapons can be, while also giving the somewhat plausible canonical explanation behind them working in-game, because you know, he's a mechanic. And he's real good at his job. Let me run through some of these insane combos. You've got some new additions like the boom cannon, the chest beam, the defiler, the electric crusher, and then you've got some returning fan favorites like knife gloves and the laser sword, as well as the classic spiked bats, which you'll be glad to hear I barely used this time around. But regular combo weapons are just the tip of the iceberg, as Nick can also create super combo weapons. These are regular combo weapons that are juiced up to the max and are even more potent in dealing with hordes of the undead. We've got the ultimate shout, a powerful ranged weapon which uses sound waves to rupture zombies' eardrums, the ultimate Grim Reaper, a scythe katana hybrid that shoots out fiery grenades with its heavy attack, and the elemental staff, another ranged weapon made up of a traffic light, a battery, and some funny chemicals. And lastly, the massive bomb, a throwable weapon that's essentially a nuclear warhead. That's right, Nick can just make a nuclear warhead as long as he has a grenade, a gasoline canister, a laptop, an RPG, and a microwave at his disposal. Throwing it will cause your screen to turn white and your clothes to magically disappear. But that's still not all. Nick can also combine a variety of 2 vehicles with one another in order to create combo vehicles, which are usually the better way to traverse the world, as they have a much higher health and typically have built-in turrets or rocket launchers. Also, you don't always have to find the items to craft combo weapons out in the game world. Around the map are some overrun safe houses, and after clearing the zombies inside, Both the weapons locker and the survivor board can be accessed. The weapons locker gives you access to any weapon you've previously held in your hands, including combos and super combos, and the survivor board lets you spawn and rescue survivors to aid in your fight against the undead. The game has also made getting PP a complete piece of cake, as the player now receives it for practically anything and everything they do. Firstly, you've got your side quests. These usually have you talk to a survivor, help them do a thing or retrieve an item for them, and then they'll join you in your fight against the undead, prestige points included. Then there are psychopath side quests, in which you'll go talk to a survivor, but oh no, they're actually revealed to be an unhinged maniac hellbent on stealing your life cubes. And lastly, there are survivor encounters. These ones usually have you come across some survivor that's surrounded by a group of zombies, and after dealing with them, you'll get a juicy stack of prestige. Every kill will now reward the player with a small amount of prestige, regardless of if it's with a regular weapon, combo weapon, or vehicle. The amount of prestige does differ between the bunch, with combo weapons rewarding you with the most. Aside from that, there's a prestige multiplier that gets applied once you get 10 kills, giving you double prestige, 25 kills for triple prestige, 50 for quadruple prestige, and so on. All the way up to 10 times the regular rate for 1000 kills in a single combo, which becomes quite doable once you've got your hands on the right combo weapons. There's also a few human enemy types to encounter, like the biker gang and the United States military. Friendly advice, they're not here to save you. But killing isn't the only way for the player to gain prestige. The game also features a wide array of collectibles for you to collect, ranging from Frank West statues to tragic endings to CDC speakers. Finding and destroying these respectively rewards the player with a set amount of prestige that increases depending on how many you've already collected. There's also prestige trials. These are in-game challenges that require you to go to a certain place, collect a set amount of collectibles, craft a specific item a bunch of times, or kill a bunch of zombies with a specific weapon or vehicle. Some of these are good and fun, such as the zombie killing challenges. Others are a complete waste of time and should have been left on the cutting room floor, such as crafting the same combo weapon 50 damn times, which boils down to using the chapter select to load into the game, spawn whatever you need from the weapon locker to craft it 4 times, and then alt F4ing out of the game. Lastly, there's also survival training challenges, which make their return from off the records arcade mode. Once again, they require you to kill a bunch of zombies in a specific way in a set amount of time, and you'll be rewarded with a juicy stack of prestige points for your efforts. Additionally, the game features a much more expansive skill tree system in which players can choose which skill tiers to unlock, rather than just automatically getting set upgrades at specific levels. The game also has a bunch of special, rarer variants of zombies that usually wield a weapon, are stronger, have a special attack, or a combination of the above. We've got firefighter zombies who wield a fire axe, cop zombies carry firearms, prisoner zombies are larger variants that have a powerful swipe attack that can knock down the player, football zombies can sprint at the player and tackle them to the ground, and spec ops zombies are variants that carry an assault rifle. Lastly, the king zombies are the creme de la creme of variants. These guys come forward out of radiation and have the ability to enrage other nearby zombies, causing them to swarm Nick. Killing any of these special variants rewards the player with a heightened amount of prestige, usually a few hundred, or usually a few thousand in case of a king. Dead Rising 3's visual fidelity was a massive step forward from the previous entries in the franchise. Main characters looked incredibly detailed for the time, complete with the aforementioned skin pores. Hell, even the random survivors and zombies look pretty good, especially considering the fact that there's almost always over 100 of them on the screen at any given time. The streets of Los Perdidos are also appropriately post-apocalypse-y. Burning buildings, crashed cars, military blockades, and random pieces of rubble riddle the streets, adding to the overall vibe of the map. Additionally, the game renders and loads the world on an impressively fast pace. A day-to-night cycle is once again present, and once again makes zombies more aggressive towards the player and their survivors' posse. At launch, the ambition to have thousands of zombies on screen at the same time did come with some performance issues, but those have been fixed through various patches and performance updates. And after having played it recently, I can happily say this game runs smooth like butter. Additionally, Dead Rising 3's loading times are greatly decreased from previous installments in the series. Gone are the days of having to wait for 10 to 15 seconds every time you enter or exit a casino. Hell, there's not even a stutter or freeze frame when traveling between the different districts of the city. Dead Rising 3 once again expands the scope of its story by having it take place in an entire city, instead of one's closed off shopping mall or two's luxurious resort. The game takes place 10 years after the Fortune City outbreak, tying it back to the overarching plot of the franchise, while still letting the story unfold on its own. The base story beats are once again quite similar to previous games. Nick and the other survivors are trapped inside of a quarantine zone in the middle of a zombie outbreak, and they must find their way out before it gets completely wiped off the map by a military firebombing. This game's narrative takes itself way more serious than any other in the franchise too, being reflected in the more toned down, dull color palettes. Dead Rising 3 starts off with a short summary on how the Los Perdidos outbreak started. and just how quickly the city was put into total lockdown. We catch up with Nick after he's failed to find a way out of the city, and now he's on his way back to a nearby diner in order to meet up with a group of other survivors. I get told how to restore health and how to perform light and heavy attacks. After making our way through the overrun military checkpoint, Nick witnesses a plane crash and we get hit with a title card. Afterwards, I make my way across this literal highway of death, which is a great showcase of what this engine is truly capable of. There's fire everywhere, zombies galore, and a never-ending bombardment of exploding cars. After a little, we make it to the diner in order to meet up with our friends, including Annie, Rhonda, Dick, and 2 other characters that suspiciously don't have a name. The 2 nameless characters die almost instantly. Very surprising. We craft our very first combo weapon before hopping in an SUV and driving down to Rhonda's garage in Ingleton. Once we arrive, the gang tries getting the TV working, but Rhonda tells us it'll take at least a couple of hours in order to fix it, leaving us with some time to explore the surrounding area. On our way out, we scavenge a phone from a ZDC agent and are contacted by a guy that calls himself Jamie Flint. He's holed up inside a surveillance room, and thus he'll be contacting us whenever he sees survivors in the city that need help. The first side quest brings us to the Zen Garden, wherein I meet Z, a wrathful man held bent on killing anyone that disturbs a piece of his garden. After defeating him, we travel over to a nearby motel where we meet a girl called Anna who asks us to collect some spray paint. After collecting and handing them back to her, we return to Rhonda's garage, where we catch a news broadcast, announcing that the US military will be firebombing the city in 6 days' time. So we're on the clock now, and now we must get our asses out of it before we're turned into a human-sized bucket of KFC. After creating our first combo vehicle, we hop in our newly created armored turret rig and drive over to a nearby military checkpoint. Upon arriving, however, it's revealed that there won't be any evacuations anymore for the time being, as it's now being controlled by a bloodthirsty gang of maybe racist bikers. After dealing with a bunch of low-rank cronies, we get confronted by the leader of the gang, who's driving the Roller Hog, also known as objectively the best vehicle in the game. We beat the absolute snot out of him and cause him to drive into a nearby fuel tanker, atomizing him instantly. On our way out of the checkpoint, we get attacked by a soldier who instantly opens fire on us. Nick, however, recognizes him as an old friend, Diego. He tells us that there's a plane stored in a hangar nearby. While handing Nick the key, Diego drops it. Nick reaches down to grab it but is unfortunately bitten and infected by a zombie. How unfortunate. This means I'll have to get my hands on some Zombrex or I won't even make it to the end of the week. Rhonda tells Nick the nearby crematorium should have a stock of Zombrex in case of emergencies. After making our way through the sewers, we arrive at the crematorium and come across a guy called Gary, who's also looking to break into the place. After making our way through the skylights, we let Gary in, and then clear out the church area before going down to cold storage. Once in the morgue, Gary tells us to find the corpse of Nicole White, who Gary's boss is looking for. After finding it, we discover the locker is empty. Gary finds her in the other room. Nick notices she looks extremely similar to Annie. There's also no Zombrex to be found, but turns out it's not an issue, as Nick's wound is mysteriously healing itself. Gary tasks us with driving Nicole's corpse over to a nearby club, where his boss is hiding out. After a bit, it's revealed that Nicole isn't the girl Gary's boss was looking for, and Gary asks us to bring Annie instead, given that she and Nicole look similar. Nick, however, has no clue of Annie's current whereabouts, so we meet up with our friends again. Once I arrive at the hangar, Dick points out that both Nick and Diego have a number tattooed on their necks, with Nick remarking they've had it for as long as they can remember. Rhonda tells us where we can find Annie's group, who we can use to trade for fuel. I travel to their Sunset Hills hideout and meet a lady named Lauren, who refuses to let us in until we collect her tattoo kit and her wedding ring. After collecting them, we return to Lauren, and she lets us into the outpost. We have a chat with Annie, Red, and Doug, and Red tasks us with destroying some government property in order to stop them from spying on us. So I shoot some cameras, sabotage a pair of satellite relays, and burn some military supplies. While on our way to the last set of supplies, we get ambushed by an entrepreneurial doctor, who's taken the apocalypse as an opportunity to harvest some organs. This is a pretty fun boss fight, to be honest, as the game tasks you with taking out the real Albert. There's about a dozen walking around this hideout at all times, as Nick is currently tripping the fuck out on drugs. After defeating him, we save his hostage, and literally make a crate explode with our bare hands. Then we retrieve our gear and return to the comm tower. I travel to the nearby police station in order to get my hands on some incriminating evidence against the military, who've been indiscriminately executing civilians. Matter of fact, they're doing it right now. I chase the police sergeant through the station, killing zombies and special forces along the way until we get to the top floor, where we face off against the sex-crazed dominatrix. After defeating her, I body slam her out of a window and retrieve the USB drive. Afterwards, we travel to a hotel in order to save Angel along with Red and Annie, but Angel's already dead. I'm then allowed to muck about for a bit while waiting on Red to collect the fuel for us. Once I get back to the comm tower, Gary ambushes the group to kidnap Annie, but all of us are in turn ambushed by the special forces, who decide to take Annie, Gary, and a couple of others. I then travel to a taxi depot that's been turned into a military compound. After sneaking into the place, we see Marion, the main villain of Case West, order her goons to forcefully infect the President of the United States. This way, General Hemlock, the main orchestrator of the outbreak, can have a straight shot for the presidency. After destroying the generators, I help the captives escape, but not before defeating the Spec Ops commander, who holds the keycard to the gate. After prying it from his cold, dead hands, we unlock the gate, and Red confronts us about a poster, advertising that the military is willing to pay big bucks for anyone that's captured with a numerical tattoo on their neck. The plot thickens. I head down to Central Storage in order to retrieve a car loaded with fuel for the plane. While doing so, I uncover one of those fancy mutated king zombies. After carefully driving back to the hangar with it, Rhonda tells us that Diego had a borderline schizophrenic breakdown and ran off to the museum of Central City. I chase Diego around the museum exhibits a little before coming face to face with him. However, he's still tweaking out, so I'll have to beat some sense into him, and after doing so, he shows us the zombie exhibits, including one which says a zombie with the number 4 tattooed on his neck started a different outbreak, causing both Nick and Diego to freak out. He also tells us that he got mugged by the bikers on his way to the museum, so now we must retrieve the plane keys from them. So I find the bikers, wipe them off the face of the earth, and return Diego to the hangar. After doing so, Rhonda tells me that she'll need some time to find a place that holds the replacement parts for the plane. So I muck about for a bit longer, kill some zombies, save some survivors, kill a roided up Giga Chad, you know, the usual. I'm then told that there used to be a collector of antique planes living in the city. After dealing with the alarm and the zombies inside of the mansion, we collect the rudder arm and the flywheel, before heading over to a nearby garage in order to collect the last piece. I then return to the airplane, and after Rhonda fixes it, we are once again ambushed by the military. Nick and Diego awaken to find themselves trapped to operating chairs, where it will be experimented on, under the supervision of Marion. The experiment goes horribly wrong, however, and Diego is killed in the process. I then come across Isabella Keys, who Nick is less than happy to see. She says she can explain everything, however, but Marion separates us via metal gates and tries to kill us with metallic loaders. After dealing with them, I escape from the lab and end up in the riverbed. I fight my way through it and the train station before dealing with a warm welcome from the bikers before making my way over to the karaoke bar in order to rescue Annie. But Gary won't let us through. He tells us to either find his ex or go through him. I attempt to go through him, but he's surprisingly adept at tanking a sledgehammer to the face, so I opt to retrieve his ex-wife instead, who happens to be Rhonda. I find Rhonda at her garage in a pretty bad shape, as the military tortured her by removing one of her arms. Quite unfortunate. I collect the first aid kit to stop the bleeding, along with some other tools in order to give her a kick-ass mechanical arm. Even shoots fire. What the fuck kind of mechanic are you, Nick? I bring Rhonda back to Gary, and he lets us inside of the bar as a reward. After dealing with the zombies, I untie Annie, and after doing so, she tells us that she is in fact currently single. That's literally what she says in the cutscene, by the way. I bring her back to the plane, and Isabella finally spills the beans on why we're immune. Back before the first game, Carlito infected 50 orphans and sent them all over the US in order to randomly start outbreaks, like ticking time bombs. It however turns out that he made one of them immune to the virus, number 12, which happens to be Nick. How did he personally manage to make a cure? It's never explained. Fucking deal with it. Red then betrays the rest of the gang in order to get his hands on $5 million, as that's what the military are offering for Nick's head. After destroying the crane and defeating Red in combat, I free the rest of the gang, and Nick and Annie finally embrace one another. Evan then pulls up with Rhonda, Gary, and a familiar voice, who is revealed to be Chuck motherfucking Green. Turns out Annie is actually Katie, who's been using her second name to live in secret. Nick, Chuck, Annie, Isabella, and Dick then board the plane, with Rhonda and Gary staying behind because there's not enough space on board. Which is complete bullshit, because there's definitely some empty seats in the back right there. Then we fly off into the credits, before being interrupted by the franchise's signature overtime chapter. Hemlock will be flying around the city, using drones to collect king zombies for his nefarious harvesting scheme, as he wants to completely purge all of Earth's people, without destroying any of the infrastructure. But before he starts any of his collecting, he promptly tosses Marion off a building. We then race around the city from hotspot to hotspot, killing zombies and destroying harvesting drones. And after destroying enough of them, Nick heroically leaps onto one of the drones, stowing away on Hemlock's ship. I ambush them in the cockpit, causing the plane to crash on top of the museum, and have a showdown with Hemlock. After defeating him, the credits truly roll with the usual post-game story. It turns out they did actually use Nick's blood to synthesize a permanent cure for the zombie disease, meaning that there were no other games made in the franchise. There's even a post-credit scene, which reveals that Isabella was actually the one that started the Los Perdidos outbreak, in order to root out the immune orphan, as she wants full and sole credit for making the cure, and to clear her family name after Carlito tarnished it. Isabella then smashes the laptop that holds the recording, wiping it from history. Now this was ending S of course, and there's an additional 4 endings that you could get in your playthrough. Ending C, in which you do manage to kill Gary at the karaoke bar instead of bringing Rhonda to him, after which you attempt to take off on the plane, but due to the faulty parts, it stalls and the group gets surrounded by zombies. Ending D, in which you go to the plane on your own instead of going to the karaoke bar, attempting to leave everyone behind before being caught red-handed and left to die in Los Perdidos. And ending F, in which you simply run out of time. You can also fail in stopping Hemlock from collecting enough of the King zombies in overtime, in which the city also just gets firebombed. There's also an unused ending X, in which Nick likely killed more than a few survivors along the way, as he's ambushed by a group of them after defeating Red. Overall, it's a serviceable story, and even though there's quite a few conveniences, I still really enjoy my time with it anytime I do a playthrough of it. You really feel Nick power up over the course of the story, as he turns from a humble mechanic to a hardened badass, practically capable of dealing with entire hordes of zombies with just his bare hands, as he strives to uncover the truth behind the outbreak, all the while saving whoever he can. But Capcom didn't just deliver a main story and call it a day, as they got to work on 4 additional short stories in the form of The Untold Stories of Los Perdidos. These take the shape in 4 episodes, each centering around a different minor character from the main story, focusing on their perspective on the outbreak and their struggle for survival. These DLCs add an honestly appreciated amount of backstory to, in some cases, entirely nameless characters, retroactively enriching the main storyline by filling in background details and exploring lives of some different survivors. The first episode is Operation Broken Eagle, which revolves around the previously unnamed commander of the Special Forces, Adam Kane. Kane's story provides a more militaristic perspective on the outbreak, as you get dropped into the city only a few hours after it's been deemed a quarantine zone. Kane's primary mission once on the ground is to establish a safe zone for the Spec Ops, as well as to locate the President, who was in the city during the start of the outbreak. Each DLC also adds an additional set or sets of collectibles, exclusive to their specific characters. ZDC cameras, which Kane can hack to give the military more eyes around the city, dog tags, which Kane can scavenge from his former squad mates, and safe houses, which Kane can infect using a bioweapon. These are also the same safe houses we can clear out as Nick in the main game, so there's a nice bit of continuity here. This DLC starts off with Kane and his squad flying into Los Perdidos, before being promptly shot down by a pair of bikers. I make my way out of the riverbed, through the metro station, and deal with the President's forces waiting on us outside. I head over to the crash site of the helicopter and collect our precious cargo, which is revealed to be a larva container that we'll use to infect the safe houses. After collecting it, I'm told to clear out the nearby taxi company in order to set up a base for the other Spec Ops squadrons. I clear out the perimeter and the Bravo unit rolls in, but then I'm told to locate Charlie units, who we've lost contact with. Once I arrive at their last known location, I discover they've all been turned into flesh eaters, but they did leave us a handy toy. After driving it back to base, I'm told to investigate the stage where the President was giving a speech as the outbreak started. I investigate the stage and track the President to some swanky mansion in Sunset Hills, and after dealing with the last of our forces, we take her back to base camp. Once back, Kane gets orders to destroy the black box, as it contains incriminating evidence against Hemlock and the rest of the Spec Ops. Kane's interrupted by a zombified President though, being turned by Marion. This seemingly changed something in Kane's morals, as he lies to command about destroying the black box before going out to fight Nick, who's broken into the camp to free the rest of the survivors. Overall, I quite like this first DLC. Kane, as a character, is a stark contrast to Nick from the main game, as he, up until the ending, is completely subordinate to his higher-ups in terms of blindly following orders, regardless of the moral ethics behind them. The second episode is Fallen Angel, which revolves around Angel Cajano, a member of the group of illegals that Nick closely works with to thwart the government's efforts throughout the story. This DLC adds another 3 types of collectibles exclusive to Angel: ZDC posters, which Angel can burn using fire or acid-based weaponry, surveillance cameras, which Angel can destroy, and medkits, which she can collect for the other survivors. And lastly, about halfway through the DLC, she can also save groups of survivors from the Spec Ops. The DLC starts off with Angel being awoken from a drunken slumber by Doug. She's taken quite hard to the outbreak and has started binge drinking to cope with all the death. He tasks us with investigating a nearby yacht that recently crashed into the shore of Central City. I ransack it for supplies before heading to a nearby safe zone. Once I arrive, I find it looking more like a mass grave. After finding some clues, I chase the sole survivor around for a little. She tells us that it was the Spec Ops that raided the hideouts, and now they're on their way to the high school. Once I arrive back at the school, I help Doug fend off the assault, before making my way towards the nearby comms tower and clearing it of zombies to establish a new safe zone for our group. Afterwards, I go to collect the food truck, as well as collect some military caches. Finally, I go ambush a group of Spec Ops at the police station together with Doug, and after interrogating the last soldier, I go rescue the rest of the survivors from a storage facility, but it's revealed that they're watching us on cameras, so Angel sets up a ruse in order to misdirect the Spec Ops to the Central City Hotel, rather than the comms tower. where she has a heroic final stand. I quite enjoyed Angel's DLC and her heroic quest for redemption as she fights to protect her fellow survivors from both the zombie threat and the government forces. The third episode is Chaos Rising, which revolves around the previously unnamed leader of the biker gang, Hunter Thibodeau, as he seeks revenge on the other bikers that betrayed him, landing him in jail. This DLC adds some desperately needed backstory to Hunter, who was in my opinion one of the coolest looking bosses the main story had to offer. It explores the darker underbelly of the city, dealing with gang conflicts, betrayal, and Hunter's quest for revenge at the center of it. Hunter can collect bottles of his favorite whiskey and destroy emergency phones. He can also fetch custom bikes for Torque, the gang's previous leader. This DLC starts off with Hunter behind bars, betrayed by his former friends. After escaping from my cell, I head up to the top floor in order to collect the key for the station's garage. I steal a police cruiser before heading over to Production Bridge in order to regroup with the rest of the gang, but once I get there, it's revealed that Torque is no longer the leader, as he's been forced out by Spider, the same scum that ratted us out. He won't let us in without giving him an offering of sorts, so I head to a nearby liquor store in order to collect a bottle of whiskey. Once I return with the whiskey, we get double-crossed by Spider and his 3 lieutenants. After dealing with a group of bikers, Spider puts a cap on our ass and disposes of us in some nearby dumpster. After patching myself up, I head over to Torque's bike shop, who offers to build us a custom bike in order to help us defeat Spider's lieutenants, but he'll need parts for it. So I collect a trio of bikes from around the city. After waiting around for a bit, I pick up Torque's new machine of death, which turns out to be this bike capable of shooting saw blades. It's also terribly loud and makes my ears bleed. I then go around the entire city and cross off Razorface, Snake, and Cannons before returning to Torque's shop. Once I arrive, I find it trashed and Torque mortally wounded, but before he passes on, he hands us one last gift, the Roller Hog. After collecting it, I go confront Spider, taking him on in one-on-one combat, and his hands prove to be no match for my Sledgehammer Axe combo. After giving him a quick shave, the rest of the gang pledges their loyalty to Hunter, but the celebrations are cut short when someone calls out 2 survivors, approaching the compound. Overall, I quite like this DLC. I quite like this game if you can tell. And the grittier look at the societal breakdown caused by the outbreak. And lastly, the 4th episode is The Last Agent, which revolves around Brad Park, a ZDC agent who slowly uncovers the truth behind the outbreak and is torn between his own personal morals and loyalty to the badge. Brad, just like all other protags, has his own set of collectibles to acquire. These range from collecting malfunctioning ZDC chips, bootleg Zombrex, burning piles of corpses, as well as rescuing survivors. This DLC starts off with Brad hanging on for dear life as his implanted ZDC chip has stopped working and thus he needs Zombrex. Luckily enough, Nick comes by and he begrudgingly injects him with a dose while telling him how disappointed he is in the ZDC's actions, starting Brad's quest for the truth. I head over to a nearby depot and collect a van filled with Zombrex for the survivors holdout in the city's hospital. After talking to the doctor outside, she tells us to collect some chips from nearby king zombies, and after doing so, I return to the hospital. Once back, I deal with a group of bankers attacking some survivors, before returning and dealing with the ones attacking the hospital. But I'm informed that they blew up the van with Zombrex, so we're right back to square one. But Brad knows of a black market Zombrex operation in Ingleton, so I head there to collect some of it. After returning to the hospital again, Cora reveals to us that all the chips were turned off manually in order to start the outbreak, and she tells us to meet a guy called Nelson, who should be able to help us. After helping him deal with his mild zombie problem, I give him some Zombrex, and he asks us to retrieve some equipment to diagnose the issue with the chips. Once I collect a thingamajig from the helicopter and some computer parts, I take Nelson to a control room to allow him to work on the issue, and wait around for a bit before returning to Nelson, who says there's a military frequency deliberately jamming communications around the city in order to screw over the ZDC. After getting to the source and dealing with the nearby spec ops, I investigate the servers, which reveal the location of another military lab in the city. Once I get there, it's revealed to be the lab where Diego met his untimely demise. Brad then discovers a laptop that holds coordinates to a prison camp at the taxi company, and he decides to cut out the ZDC chip in his neck, as keeping it in place just allows the military to track his every move. Once I get to the camp, I find Adam Kane, desperately clinging on to life after being beaten to a pulp by Nick. Kane tells Brad that Hemlock killed the president, and hands him the military chopper's black box in order to expose the true perpetrators behind the outbreak. Once I return to the hospital, I collect all the survivors for extraction before driving over to the comms tower to pick up even more, including Gary and Rhonda. Nice wrapping up of that loose end. I then make a final stop to collect Nelson, before driving all of them over to the Dilly Diner, where Nick's story started all these hours ago. We head up to the roof, and get all the survivors onto a chopper before flying out of the city, mere hours before the firebombing occurs. Brad's story is a neat bow to tie off the chronological story of Dead Rising 3, as it doesn't leave much open for questioning after everything's said and done. Each of these DLCs adds to the depth and and breadth of the overall narrative, providing a new gameplay experience focusing on different aspects of the survivors, from military operations to civilian resistance, to gang warfare and conspiratorial investigations. The untold stories add an appreciated amount of additional content to the story, offering players varied perspectives on the outbreak that complement and enhance the main storyline. On release, Dead Rising 3 was praised for the expansive open world available for players to explore, dense crowds of zombies, and the sheer level of freedom it offered for players to approach combat and exploration in whatever way they saw fit. Review outlets particularly lauded the reworked crafting system, which allowed for a higher amount of creativity in weapon and vehicle combinations. The apocalyptic setting mixed with the humorous bits of comedic relief was met with mixed reception, but was generally seen as a natural evolution on the series' prior entries. The game was not without fair criticism, however, as some pointed out the inconsistent frame rates, and occasional bugs or glitches that bogged down the experience on Xbox One. The narrative and character writing were also noted to be weaker elements of the game, with some finding the story to lack depth compared to the game world, which was rich with interactivity. Dead Rising 3 significantly impacted how open world games could handle large-scale numbers of NPCs on screen without noticeable losses in performance. This technical achievement demonstrated the capabilities of 8th generation consoles at the time, and influenced how developers would approach crowd simulation and large-scale battles as a whole. Within the scope of Dead Rising, this installment is often credited with transitioning the franchise into a more narrative-focused and technologically advanced era. It expanded its audience by making the game much more approachable to newcomers, due to its more forgiving time-limit mechanics, while still returning it for long-term fans of the franchise. Even years after its release, Dead Rising 3 is a game I continue to go back to for more mindless zombie slaying. It showcased the sheer potential of new console tech at the time, and set new standards for interactive and immersive gameplay. Looking back, it's clear that Dead Rising 3 wasn't just another sequel in a popular franchise. It was a landmark title that made waves ripple across the game development scene, and left a lasting impression on the industry. Its legacy is a testament to the innovative minds of the creators, and the enduring appeal of its gameplay. 8 blueprints out of 10. And there you have it, the full autopsy of Dead Rising 3, dissected a decade after its first hit on screens. For those of you that played it back when it came out, I hope this retrospective reignites some of that initial adrenaline, and for those of you who've never experienced it, perhaps now you'll be intrigued enough to give it a spin. Hey there, thanks so much for watching to the end of this video. If you enjoyed, leave a like, a comment, and subscribe, as I have 252 more videos to make between now and the inevitable heat of the universe. Real quick, I want to give a quick thanks for all the support on the Dead Rising videos so far. Your enthusiasm and overall support makes these deep dives on classic games so worth it, so that I don't just have to cover whatever's on the Steam new and trending page every other week. Follow me on Twitter and join the Discord. I've been Xeniverse, and I'm off to Willamette. One last time.